Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're having a good week so far. Last week in Econ, we talked about supply and demand and how markets came to equilibrium. How if there was a situation where the price was above the equilibrium price, a surplus would develop, sending a signal to the market that that price was too high, pushing the price down, increasing quantity demanded, and decreasing quantity supplied until we arrive back at a new equilibrium. Likewise, if the price was too low, below the equilibrium, we developed a shortage, and the self-interested behavior of buyers and sellers adjusted and got rid of that disequilibrium. So we drew the Marshallian cross to supply and demand X, and we said that if markets are allowed to work and they're freely operating with minimal government intervention, that ultimately we will arrive at that equilibrium price and quantity. In the real world, markets are seldom at equilibrium, but the forces are there trying to get us toward that equilibrium. What we want to do this week is take that idea that the market for Liney's Red, or for college, or for being an economist, or for the price of the US dollar versus the euro, or any good or service is initially in equilibrium. So we're going to assume that it is, but then we're going to say, what happens if something changes? What happens if consumers' incomes rise? How does the market adjust in that situation? What happens if the cost of producing the beer increases? How does the market adjust to a new equilibrium price and quantity? So what we're going to do this week, and this is a really, really important chapter because so much of economic analysis is looking at price changes and quantity changes and why they do that, is to develop a systematic approach to market equilibrium change questions. There are a ton of exercises on the website, linked on the Blackboard site there for you to practice this with. The multiple choice questions, the question about quick trip gasoline, and then the ones with market equilibrium changes about college tuition and hamburger and just a whole bunch of them. So please, please, please practice this. It's really an important bread and butter chapter for this course. So here's what we're going to do every single time. Everybody raise your right hand. Got them up there? Gonna repeat after me. I state your name. Anybody out there say I state your name? That's what I thought. You got a good sense of humor. But I promise every time that I face a market equilibrium change question, can't hear you. I promise every time I face a market equilibrium change question that I will religiously follow the following 3 steps as listed on page 1 of the week 5 or whatever it is, chapter 5, week 3 note set. I will, number 1, draw the X and label it. Assume that the market I'm dealing with is initially in equilibrium. I will, number 2, split my brain and figure out which side of the market is initially affected by this change. Is it supply or demand? Is it producers or is it buyers? And once I've done that and figured out initially what's going on, then in step 3, I will take that curve and shift it the correct direction. Right is an increase, left is a decrease. Label the new equilibrium and check it against my intuition and see if it makes sense. Did you repeat all that after me? No, I talk a little too much. But the story is every time you're going to follow the 3 steps that are outlined on your notes for this particular week, okay? Let's practice these. Please, please read this along the way, and we're going to practice these steps several times in today's video lecture. So if you turn to page 2, we're going to look back at the market for Leinenkugel's Red Lager. And it says in question 1 there that something happens, and that is that the price of spotted cow beer, a substitute, remember that term from last week, a substitute for Liney's Red, rises. So spotted cow is now more expensive. The question is what's going to happen to the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity of Leinenkugel's Red Lager beer. And so the first step is to draw the X and label it. Okay, that is to assume that the market, in this case for Liney's Red, is initially in equilibrium. So let's do that here. You've got the space already labeled. Remember, this is the price per 6-bottle pack of Liney's Red. And here's the number of 6-bottle packs of Liney's Red. So this is the Liney's market. And you're going to label or draw the X. Here's demand sloping downward, D0. And here's the supply curve sloping upward. We're going to label it S0. And where they intersect is our initial equilibrium. So that's here at price P0 and quantity Q0. That is our initial equilibrium price and quantity. And then, so once we've got step 1, draw the X and label it, second step is to split your brain and ask yourself, which side of the market is initially affected here when the price of spotted cow rises? Is it the demanders, the buyers of Liney's Red, or is it the suppliers, the producers of Liney's Red? And you might be saying, well, they're both going to be affected ultimately by this. And the answer is, you're right. But the question is, who is initially affected? If it's the buyers of Liney's Red, that's demand. And if it's the producers of Liney's Red, that's the supply. And so who is initially affected here when the price of an alternative beer, Spotted Cow, rises? Yeah, it's demand, right? It's the buyers. They're looking at the beer and saying, which one should I buy? Liney's Red or Spotted Cow? And what happens, of course, is that when Spotted Cow is more expensive, the demand for Liney's Red is going to do what? Well, step 3 says figure that out, right? Which way is demand going to shift here in the market? And so demand is going to increase for Liney's Red. If you were filling in the blanks, by the way, in step 2 there, make sure that you put that initially the effect was on the buyers. And so in step 3, we know that because Spotted Cow is now more expensive, that more people are going to buy Liney's Red at any price. And so the whole demand curve for Liney's Red will shift to the right, an increase in demand. Where's the new equilibrium? Well, the new equilibrium is where the new demand curve crosses the supply. And that's up here at combination E1. At a higher equilibrium price and a greater equilibrium quantity. So if you're filling in the blanks there, the new equilibrium is in a situation where the equilibrium price has increased and the equilibrium quantity has decreased. If you didn't take a moment to draw this graph on the graph above, please do so. But the answer is that higher prices and more quantity bought and sold for Liney's Red should be the outcome. Does that make sense? It should, right? Check it against your intuition. Does it make sense that when Spotted Cow is more expensive, that we would likely see more Liney's Red bought and sold? And the answer is yeah, because people are going to shift their demand toward Liney's Red. We would also anticipate that there's likely to be at least some increased price for Liney's Red because the firm can sell the beer for a little bit higher price. It costs more for them to produce more, and they can pass that on to the consumers who are willing to pay a little bit more for Liney's Red, given that Spotted Cow is considerably more expensive. So it works with our intuition, as economics obviously should, if this model is a good model. Okay? So that is the first application of market equilibrium changes. We did 3 things. We drew the X and we labeled it. We split our brain and asked which side of the market was initially affected. And thirdly, we said, all right, shift that curve the correct direction. Right is more and left is less. Draw the new equilibrium and check it against our intuition. And it worked. Everything is as we would have anticipated. So we're going to follow those 3 steps every single time for market equilibrium change questions. Now, one piece of warning, and this is stated on your sheets several times here, and that is that with these kinds of questions, especially if I give you a multiple choice question on a quiz or an exam, it's tempting to jump to conclusions and to say, well, gosh, you know what, I think this is what's going to happen to the prices. There's more demand, price is going to increase. And then people might say, well, gosh, if price is higher, that would lead to less demand, so therefore shift the demand to the left. That's not what happened here, right? The story is you want to follow the 3 steps. Do not jump to the conclusion of what the outcome will be and then walk backwards. Start each step as appropriate and then come up with the conclusion that you anticipate and double check it. It will get you the right answer every single time. And that's what we're all looking for, right? To understand this model. All right, ready for another one? Let's do it. Before we do that, let me tell you a quick little joke. Do you guys know why they only have 239 beans in every bowl of chili? Because if you had one more, it'd be 240. It's true. My son likes that joke. Anyway, let's move to page 3. Sorry about the opportunity cost of that joke. It's pretty high, right? But if you turn to the next page, let's look at one additional application here. And question 2 there on the top of page 3 says, assume that Liney's Red is a normal good, a term we introduced last week, and consumers' incomes decrease. So maybe we're in a recession, times are hard, and Liney's Red is a normal good. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of Liney's Red Lager? Well, 3 steps, right? First step is to draw the X and label it. So in your space that's provided there, again, this is Liney's Red. Draw a demand curve that slopes downward and label it D0. Draw a supply curve that slopes upward and label it S0. And where they intersect is going to be our initial equilibrium price, E0, and our initial equilibrium quantity, Q0. So that is our starting point. And then once we've done that, just hang on one second here. When we've done that, the second step is to split our brain and ask yourself, which side of the market is initially affected here? When consumers' incomes fall. Is it the buyers of the beer, or is it the producers of the beer? You're like, hey, both sides are going to be affected. The answer is you're right, but the initial effect is on the buyers, the consumers. They don't have as much income. And so if you're filling in the blanks there for step 2, who's initially affected? It's definitely the buyers. And then the third step is to shift that curve, that demand curve, the appropriate direction. So if it's a normal good, some goods, remember, are inferior, but if it's a normal good and people have less income, which way does demand shift? Demand shifts to the left, a decrease in demand. Normal goods, if you had more income, you'd buy more of it, like electronics and all of that, vacations and financial planning services, and you might go out to eat more at the restaurant and what have you. But when you have less income, demand decreases, and that's the story here for normal goods. People are probably going to buy something else besides Liney's Red, maybe a cheaper beer even, maybe Old Milwaukee or some crap like that. And so the story is that, maybe you like Old Milwaukee, nothing personal, it's just not the beer I like. But the story is that now, the new equilibrium is down here, right, where the new lower demand curve crosses supply. And we can label that combination E1. And what's going to happen, as we would expect if there's less demand, is that the price will fall and the equilibrium quantity will also decrease. So if you're filling in the blanks, with less demand, we would expect a decrease in the equilibrium price of the beer, and we would expect also a decrease in the equilibrium quantity bought and sold of Leinenkugel's Red Lager, because people don't have as much income, and they view this as a normal good. Okay, everybody got the blanks there? And so there is a common mistake here. Let me just kind of have you think through this again. I do not want you to jump to conclusions. You put your right hand up and you swore to me that every time you would follow 3 steps. If you jump to conclusions, your logic might be something like this. Well, hey, if people don't have as much money, that's going to lead to a lower price for the beer. Not as many people are going to want it, so the supply will decrease. The firms won't produce as much. Shift supply to the left. But if you shift the supply to the left, the new equilibrium would actually be at a higher price. And we know that's not going to happen when people don't have the incomes to buy. So don't do that, right? Don't jump to conclusions. Don't kind of think about the outcome and then try to intuit it backwards. Start at step 1, then go to step 2, then go to step 3, and every time you get the right answer. Let's do a couple more. I think you're getting the gist of this. That's awesome. Let's turn to page 4 and talk about another application. Before we do that, I need to erase these. So, question number 3 says, ceteris paribus, in an attempt to reduce alcohol consumption, the government decides to increase taxes on Miller Brewing, which owns the Liney's brand name, for each 6-bottle pack they produce. So the government is jacking up taxes on Miller for each 6-pack they produce. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity? Do not jump to conclusions, especially on this one, because this is one where students oftentimes will get it incorrect. But the story is you follow 3 steps. The first step is to draw the X and label it. Assume the market for Liney's Red is initially in equilibrium. So by now you've gotten used to doing this. You want to draw a demand curve that slopes down and label it D0. You want a supply curve that slopes up and label it S0. And where they intersect is the initial equilibrium. Price of P0 and quantity of Q0. We'll call that coordinate pair E0. And once we've got the X labeled and drawn, then what we need to do is split our brain. And we're going to ask ourselves which side of the market is initially affected here when the government taxes Miller, for the Liney's name, more heavily for each 6-bottle pack they produce. You're like, they're both going to be affected. The answer is right. You're right. You're right. But we need to figure out We need to figure out which side of the market is initially impacted. And the answer there is supply, right? If the government raises the cost of production, the initial effect is on the sellers. So if you're filling in the blank there, the initial impact is on the sellers, the producers of the beer. And then in step 3, say, okay, but which way does supply shift when there are higher costs of production, where the government is hitting the business more heavily with higher taxes? And the answer is that supply shifts to the left, because left is less. I don't want you saying up and down, because up and down here is trouble, right? A decrease in supply is a shift down, but a shift down is actually an increase. So a shift to the left is a decrease in supply. It says at any price, the firm can't produce as much because they're getting more taken away by the government. So with higher taxes, supply shifts to the left. And the new equilibrium is up here where the new supply crosses demand. And that's at a higher equilibrium price and a lower equilibrium quantity. Call that E1. So filling in the blanks down there and making sure you graph this in the space above, the new equilibrium is at a higher equilibrium price, so that's increased, but the equilibrium quantity has decreased. Does that make sense? When the government increases taxes on Miller for their production of this Liney's red beer, would we expect a higher price for the beer and less of it bought and sold? I think so. Miller's going to get those higher taxes, and to the extent that they can, they're going to pass those on in the form of higher prices for their beer. Now, they may not be able to do too much of that. Depends upon how competitive the market is and whether the other beer producers are also taxed in the same way. But the basic story is they're going to try to pass on as much of that increased taxes as they can. But that's going to lead to some people saying, I'm not going to buy as much beer, or at least not as much of this particular beer. So we would expect a higher equilibrium price and a lesser equilibrium quantity. Here's a temptation. This is one students often get wrong because they don't follow the 3 steps. And that is, the temptation is to jump to conclusions and say, let me think about this. The government's going to put on higher taxes. That's going to lead to higher prices for the beer, so demand is going to fall. And they shift the demand curve to the left, and they come up with the new equilibrium, which is down here, at a lower price and a lower quantity. But that doesn't make sense, because the story is that with higher taxes on the beer, we're not going to see lower prices for that beer. We're going to see somewhat higher prices, but lesser quantity. So follow the 3 steps and don't jump to conclusions. In case you're wondering about something we did a little earlier in the class, and this is a good place to kind of do this, is to say, how does the market get from E0 to E1? Let me just kind of tell you a story so you can kind of see the invisible hand of Adam Smith in action here, but you don't have to ever do this on a test or whatever. Suppose the price is P0. Let's suppose this price of beer is $7 for a 6-bottle pack. And initially, at that price, we got a certain amount bought and sold, whatever that is. When the supply decreases because of higher taxes, now the problem is that at $7, if you read across, the quantity that the firm can produce is less than the quantity that people want to buy. So we've got, at that old price, a temporary shortage, right? People want more beer than they're going to get at that $7 price. And so the market sends a signal and says, ooh, that price is too low, and pushes the price up, which then leads to a decrease in quantity demanded. So quantity demanded changes when the price changes, and that was because the whole supply shifted to the left. Some people won't buy the beer at $8 who would have bought it at $7. And at the same time, when the selling price increases, Miller can put more resources into producing more beer and then can have that situation where that shortage is eliminated when the market finally comes to rest at a price quantity combination called E1. Okay, so that's how the market adjusts. I didn't really talk about that along the way, but I thought you might be like, how do we get there? And that's just the Adam Smith, the invisible hand in action. Okay? All right. So let's do one more with this, and then we'll wrap it up in just a second and see what we can come up with. So page 5, another market equilibrium change question. And this one says, ceteris paribus, all else equal, if the cost of hops used to make Liney's Red falls. So hops become cheaper. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity in the Liney's Red market? And you follow 3 steps every single time. You draw the X first, and you label it. So here's the price of Liney's Red and the quantity of Liney's Red. And here's the X. P0, Q0. Market is initially at rest in equilibrium at E0. And then you split your brain. And you say, okay, who's initially affected here when the cost of hops to make the beer falls? And by now you're like, okay, I get it, right? The suppliers are the ones who are initially affected. Yes, it will impact consumers, but initially it's on the cost side. And so if hops are cheaper, then what that means is that at any price that they can sell the beer for, they can put more product out there. So the whole supply curve in step 3 shifts to the right. If you didn't fill in the blanks for step 2, I went a little fast there. Splitting your brain, the initial effect is on the sellers. It's affecting their cost of production. And so in step 3 then it talks about and says, yeah, if there are lower input prices, one of those determinants of supply, then at any price the firm can produce more, so supply shifts to the right. The new equilibrium is down here at a price of P1 and at an equilibrium quantity of Q1. So if you draw that in your picture above, and label it. And then fill in the blanks and say the new equilibrium, right, is where the new supply intersects the demand curve. The equilibrium price has decreased. The equilibrium quantity has increased as we would anticipate. That makes sense, right? If it's cheaper to produce the beer, the hops are cheaper, Miller's likely to pass that on, only to the extent that they have to, but at least likely to pass it on to some extent in the form of somewhat lower prices. And when there are lower prices for the beer, some people are like, hey, I'm willing to buy Liney's Red or buy a little more Liney's Red, and so the quantity that people would purchase is also increased. So what we have is a lower equilibrium price and an increased equilibrium quantity. Again, don't jump to conclusions. Don't say something like, if we have a situation here where it's cheaper to produce the beer, then hey, the beer is going to get cheaper, so demand increases and shift demand to the right. That's not how this works. The initial effect is on the cost of production. The initial effect is on the supply, and supply shifts right, which all else equal drives down the price and leads to more bought and sold. So please follow the 3 steps every single time. Now I want to ramp this up just a bit on the next page. And ask the question of what happens if there are factors changing simultaneously that affect supply and demand. So in other words, we've only looked at one determinant. What happens if the cost of hops changes and nothing else changes? How does the market adjust to a new equilibrium? Or what if consumer incomes change and nothing else changes? How does the market adjust? But I'd like for us to at least think about, we're not going to do this in too much precision, but think about the ideas of what if there's something that's changing that affects demand and simultaneously a factor that's changing that affects supply. What's going to be the outcome of that market equilibrium adjustment process? And if we use the algebra of this, we could answer this very, very precisely. We could solve that system of equations, the old one and the new one, and see where the new price and the new quantity are relative to the old one. We're not going to do this in this class. Some micro teachers, a lot of later economics, more advanced economics, there's all kinds of math on this stuff. But in reality, demand curves are seldom linear, and so doing the math for the math's sake, I'm not sure is all that valuable, and so we're not going to do that. We are going to think about the idea though. And so on page 6 there, I'm going to do one example, and then we'll do a second example, and then let you think about this on your own time. So example 1 says, if Miller's labor costs increase, so the workers' health insurance premiums or their underlying wages or whatever rise, and consumer preferences or taste, popularity for Leiny's Red increase at the same time. So this is a great marketing campaign. It says, drink Leiny's Red, you're going to be an athlete, you're going to be able to climb tall mountains, swim miles and miles in a triathlon, be an econ, whatever. Makes it more popular at the same time. So higher costs for Leiny's to be produced and more popular in terms of consumer demand. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity? Well, here's what we know, as it says on your notes. We know that the Leiny's Red Lager supply curve will shift to the with higher labor costs, the supply curve will shift to the left, a decrease in supply. At the same time, for the second one, the Leiny's Red Lager demand, when the beer is more popular, will shift to the right. So what we have is less supply because of higher costs and more demand. What do we know is going to happen to the equilibrium price? What's going to happen to the price of this beer when people want it more and there's less of it available at any price? Price will go up. It's a perfect storm, right? When people really want, it's a bad, let's say, oftentimes in the winter, if we have a really bad cold winter, and at the same time we have situations where some of the production facilities for electricity go offline to do maintenance, and it's happened many times, that's a perfect storm for higher heating prices, propane prices, or natural gas prices, or what have you. And it's the same thing in this example, right? Price will definitely increase. What's going to happen to the quantity of Leiny's Red bought and sold here? And the answer is, I don't know. It depends on the sizes of the shift. So let me just draw a picture here to kind of have us think through that. Here's the market for Leiny's Red. And here's the initial demand, D0, and supply, S0, and the initial price, P0, and quantity, Q0. That's our initial equilibrium. So what happens in this market? Well, because of the higher labor costs, supply shifts to the left, right? While simultaneously, the more popular nature of the beer means demand shifts to the right. And they intersect, the new supply and demand up here, at a definitely higher price, right? No doubt about it. In terms of quantity, I don't know. In this case, it didn't change with the way that I drew this graph, and you know why? The shift of demand to the right, take a look at the board here, the shift to the demand to the right, was the exact same magnitude as the shift of the supply to the left. So in terms of quantity, they canceled each other out. But it could have been different, right? What happens if demand doesn't increase to D1? What happens if demand only increases this far to D1? Well, the new equilibrium is where the new supply and demand intersect. It's still at a higher price, but at a lesser equilibrium quantity. The decrease in supply was bigger than the increased demand that people wanted, and so therefore actually less of it did get bought and sold. The price was higher, but there was less bought and sold. Or you could think about a scenario like this next one here. Whiteboards are nice in terms of this kind of erasing. Plus they smell really strong. But the story is that what happens if we had a situation like this where supply, decreased to S1, but demand increased way up here. Everybody and his brother and sister want to drink Leiny's Red. It was the rock solid, new popular drink, gotta have it, right? Then the equilibrium would be up here, where supply and demand intersect, and we would actually see more bought and sold. But definitely still a higher price. So what we know for sure is that the price will be higher. We don't know what will happen to the quantity without more information about the magnitude of the two shifts, which one is bigger, or if they're the same size, then there's no effect on quantity. Okay? Let's look at one more application of simultaneous shifts, and then we will end this episode. Let me erase this, though. And the second example on page 7 here looks at a situation where Miller's technology improves. So Miller introduces a new bottling machine that's able to put more beer out there per hour. And secondly, the price of pizza, a complement with Liney's Red, falls. So you have pizza with your beer, and the pizza is now cheaper. So we got to figure out what's going to happen when there's better technology and a lower price of a complement good, in this case pizza. Well, here's what we know, right? The supply curve of Liney's Red will do what? When there is better technology. It'll shift to the right, an increase in supply. What will happen to demand for the second blank? So supply will shift to the right. Demand, when we have a complement like pizza getting cheaper, what's going to happen to the demand for the beer? It's also going to shift to the right, because if the pizza is cheaper, then more people are going to eat more pizza, and they're going to want more beer to go with that, so the demand for the complement will also increase. So what's going to happen here? There's more demand, and there's more supply. What's going to happen to the equilibrium quantity, the amount of that pizza, the amount of that beer, sorry, Liney's Red, that's bought and sold, the quantity? Yeah, it's going to increase, right? People want it more, and there's more of it will get bought and sold. What's going to happen to the price of that beer? And the answer is it depends. I don't know, right, without more information. It could go up, it could fall, or it could stay the same. It depends on the sizes of the shifts. But I know the quantity will increase. Let's just draw a graph to illustrate that. Here's the market for Liney's Red, initially in equilibrium at D0, S0, equilibrium price is P0 and Q0 quantity. That's our starting point, right? And so two things happen here simultaneously. The first is that technology increases or improves. So that shifts supply to the right. Simultaneously, the price of the complement, the pizza, falls, and so the demand for Liney's Red also increases and shifts to the right. The new equilibrium is out here, where the new supply and demand intersect, and no matter how you draw those, right, there's going to be more bought and sold. So that I know definitively. The impact on the equilibrium price is indeterminate. In this particular example, this first starting case, there was no effect. And the reason was that the sizes of the two shifts, technically the sizes up and down, but we're just going to say left and right, were of the same size, and so they canceled each other out in terms of the price effect. But that's not the only possible scenario, right? Suppose, for example, that instead of demand going out to that D1 that we had just a second ago, suppose that demand only increases a little bit. Right? Price of pizza fell, but not that much, and people drink a little more beer, but not that much. Then the new equilibrium is out here, still at a greater quantity than Q0, but actually at a lower price. The increase in supply, the increase in product on the market outstripped any growth in demand, and that led to a lower equilibrium price. Or you could surely think about a situation where suppose demand actually increased all the way out to this one instead of this small one. If that's the case, right, then where supply and demand intersect is still at a greater quantity, but the impact on the price would be an increase. That makes sense, right? Yeah, there's an increase in product, an increase in supply, but the growth in demand more than outstripped that, leading to higher prices for this scarce resource, this Leinenkugel's red lager beer. So those are situations where there are simultaneous changes. I only did 2 examples here, and you did them with me. Obviously, there are 2 other cases. I mean, we did an increase in demand and a decrease in supply for the first example. We did an increase in demand and an increase in supply in this example. We could do a decrease in demand and supply for the third example, or we could do a situation where demand decreases and supply increases for the fourth example. So you should be able to think about all 4 of those possibilities in terms of doing simultaneous changes. The main story for this section, though, is that we're typically going to look at what happens when one variable changes, and you're going to draw the X and then split your brain, figure out which side is initially affected, label the new equilibrium, and then cross-check what you see against your intuition and make sure that it makes sense. I strongly recommend that you practice this with lots of examples. So there are tons of them out there on the web, on my website, on Blackboard, for you to practice and make sure you can make this your own. Here's what I need you to do, because normally when I give you a question, a multiple choice question or what have you, I'm not going to draw, give you a space and say, hey, step 1, label it, step 2, split your brain, step 3. I'm not going to walk you through that one step at a time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a word problem and say, suppose that the market for Nike tennis shoes is initially in equilibrium at this price and quantity, and we see a situation where, let's say, consumers expect that Nike's going to have a sale next week. What's going to happen to the equilibrium price and quantity today? And so you're going to have to, on the side of the paper, draw the X, split your brain, right, and draw the new demand curve. The new demand in this case, if consumers expectations, remember, expect a lower price in the future, demand is going to shift to the left today, so draw that, and realize that the new equilibrium, where supply and the new demand cross, will be at a lower price and quantity. So it's going to be word problems. That's what you see when you see newspaper articles, or you hear stories on the television, or you're thinking about investing for the stock market. And you're thinking about, how are these changes going to affect the markets that I'm interested in? And if you go back to those fundamentals, step 1, 2, and 3, every single time, you get the answer right every single time. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about how to use the market model of supply and demand. We're going to look at this a lot more in detail later in the course and apply some additional concepts. But those are the fundamentals. So I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.